Hello and welcome to the Road from Emmaus podcast. I'm Jason Lowe, joined by Andrew Chow, and we are two totally ordinary Catholic guys hoping to share our journeys. Like the disciples on the road to Emmaus, we've each encountered Christ in our lives. Join us as we talk about what comes next. It's been a whirlwind of a year, and looking back at 2020 is no simple task. Our day-to-day lives ground to a halt with the COVID pandemic, but that doesn't mean nothing happened during the year. Andrew and I take this last episode of 2020 to look back and do an examen of sorts on the year. What were some highlights from 2020? What did we learn? And above all, how did we bring Jesus into these things? We hope you enjoy and wish you and your loved ones a very Merry Christmas. So over the weekend, my friends and I did, so every year we do like a gift exchange, a white elephant gift exchange. And we did it virtually this year, obviously because of COVID. And I managed to come away with a set of smart light bulbs, which is the first time I've ever gotten that kind of a device. Like I have my Google Home Mini, that's basically it. But I ever since I came to your place, actually, because, you know, I'll come over and then your dining room light will be on or off and you'll be like, I was going to say, hey, blank, but I realized that would trigger my Mini. So anyway, you would just use that smart device to turn on your smart lights. So ever since that, I was like, damn, I really wish I had one of those things for myself. So I managed to come away with that from my white elephant gift exchange with my friends. Nice. Except I was trying to set it up before we started recording, and I was coming across a lot of issues. So I don't know if it'll work out as intended.
It's funny because I don't even have that many smart things anymore since I moved. Yeah, so because so I still have the light switch for my bedroom, but then essentially the light switches for the rest of my unit are all in like one panel with like 4 light switches in a row. And like right. The way that at least the smart switches that I have work just really isn't conducive to that kind of like a in a row type of a deal. Mm-hmm. So like my dining room is no longer smart. And I had to like find things. Anyways, I had to like find things to do with my now like useless, basically smart switches. One of them is now turning my Christmas tree on and off. Okay. So I'm not sure what I'm gonna do in the new year. And the other one is literally just not being used because I just can't figure out anything to do with it. But,
Maybe I'll take them off your hands if you would be so kind to donate them. Speaking of turning the lights off, I think that's what we want to do with our podcast this year. With this last podcast of the year, to do a bit of a year in review. I like the way you put it in our opening prayer separately, kind of an examen on our 2020 year. That's a nice way of putting a Catholic Ignatian spin on it. Yeah. And I mean, it's kind of, you know, the typical thing to do on a podcast. You know, you reach the last episode of the year and you take a look back at the last 12 months. So yeah, hopefully as we kind of share about our faith journey, I think it'll be a really good exercise for us individually even. You know, I'm not going to lie, I don't know, this isn't something I normally do, right? Like I know there are people who will like, yeah, at the start of a new year, they'll set out their goals and you know, for each month they want to do this particular thing. And some people are really good at that, some people aren't. I just straight up, I'm neither. I just don't do goal setting for the year. And so accordingly, I don't really look back at the end of the year and be like, hey, this was actually a pretty good year, or hey, I did this good thing, or I could have done better on this other thing. So this will be a new and interesting exercise for me. I don't think you're really that kind of person either, are you?
No, not at all. Every year my dad like gives me the gears for it. He's just like, oh, like, you know, you need a 3-year or 5-year plan. And I'm like, Dad, like I'm trying to figure out my plan for tomorrow. Like, but I think, I mean, we'll get into it, but, I have gotten into more and more of a habit of doing like regular examens and like
right,
that's
yeah.
So this isn't as strange in that sense, but definitely this would be my first time doing it, like looking as far reaching as like a full year.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, I'll start with some low-hanging fruit on my end. I think it was our third episode when we talked about recapping the GT20 retreat that we both went to back in September. And so as a really quick reminder, in case anyone wasn't aware, GT20, that was something that I was on the planning committee for. So it was a year-long journey and Andrew was part of the planning committee for the GT19 retreat, and yeah, I think it covered so much of my year that it would be a total misstep to not even bring this up. But I don't want to get into it too much, just because I know we did a whole like 45-minute episode on it anyway. But it was a really interesting learning journey. I think just thinking about how it really prodded me to go about my faith intentionally, and I think this is a good lead in, because this is something that both of us are going to talk about later on. But with the theme of the actual retreat being intentional discipleship, it really placed an emphasis on my own prayer life, and trying to make sure that, when things are not going as exciting as I might be used to, or as terribly as sometimes they might go. It's still important to keep up the habit of prayer, and making sure that you're still working on your relationship with Christ. And yeah, I mean, I think I again don't need to dive into it too much, but like, it would just not make sense for me to not talk about GT20 at all.
Yeah, I think the word you're looking for is remiss. It would be remiss for you.
That was exactly the word I was looking for. I was really fumbling there. I would be remiss to not mention that.
Yeah, but it was entertaining to watch you like try and like grasp at it.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, speaking from my experience from GT19, definitely it's a huge part of the year. For me, one of the big things that defined my year is definitely getting engaged. I mean, it's one of those things that, it only happens once, and obviously it's like the mark of a new chapter. We're kind of smirking because when we first started brainstorming about like, oh, what we want to talk about, I actually didn't bring it up. But
so Andrew brought up like, three other things related to like his spiritual life and the journey that he's been on for 2020, and then I was like, so was getting engaged not one of the like bigger things that happened to you this year, or?
And so to be clear, it was a big thing. It's just, I don't know. I feel like I've just been in it for a while, I guess, and I'm just used to it. But no, definitely looking back at the year is huge, right? First and foremost, with getting engaged, I mean, it really brought the concept of thinking about vocations really to the forefront of my life. I feel like, we talked about this in our first episode, right? It was kind of this thing where like once a year or once every couple of years, maybe there's this vocations director that comes in and talks about being a priest. And that was kind of, it for talking about that. This year, as a combination of factors, right, with spending more time looking at the spiritual life, having a spiritual director, which we're going to talk about in a bit, and all of that, getting engaged gave a really different light to the way that I was approaching my life. So I think it was definitely a huge turning point for a lot of those other things that I talked about. And yeah, definitely, particularly this Advent has been really different, right? Where Advent, they talk about, as Catholics talk about being in this season of expectation, right? And I really resonate with that to a different level, right? Because I'm also in a season of expectation coming up to my marriage, right?
Yeah.
And so that's been like my prayer over Advent, like really trying to, the way I've put it is like rest in the spirit of expectation and kind of, learn what that means and really abide in that. And it's been really beautiful, but a very different experience.
I saw on Instagram that Cherry posted about you guys committing to doing the Angelus together every day. Was that it?
Yeah.
Or yeah, that's a really beautiful way of praying together and really participating in the season of Advent. Are you guys just doing that, or is there anything else that you guys are doing together?
That's the main thing. At one point, we wanted to do some other reflections and stuff, but honestly, just life got a little bit busy. That's been the main thing that we've been doing together, and it's been really fruitful actually. So what we did is we just realized that we have all these smart devices. Well, we can use it for our spiritual life too. So both of us have smart watches. So we set an alarm on our watch for 12 o'clock and 6 p.m. And so it just vibrates and reminds us to like stop where we are and pay the end. It's almost like, it's really interesting because it's almost actually reflective of, medieval, like feudal times, right? When like the chapel bells would ring with the Angelus bells and everyone in the town would pause and pray the Angelus, right?
Yeah.
I feel like we're almost it's like the modern day version of that, right?
Yeah, the very smart modern day version of that with smartwatch vibrations. I should have used that as a segue. I didn't even realize that that would be a thing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know if I told you, but
No, no, no. Um, yeah, no, that's great. It's funny because, well, actually, it's not funny. It's the opposite. Over the weekend with my spiritual director, I was talking about. I don't remember how we got onto it, but we were talking about annulments and like
yeah.
how to get annulments. So I it's not really relevant, obviously, but I
I
was just
don't know what you're saying here, but
yeah. But you know what? I'm going to use that to segue into our talk about spiritual director. So, yeah. So for me, I would definitely say one of the biggest things that happened to me from a spiritual life perspective was getting my spiritual director. So the process was interesting. I think a couple of my friends, they had mentioned to me that like they thought it would be a good idea. I was sharing about trying to discern a better prayer life, trying to discern some other things as well, again, which I'll get into in a bit. But I think just sharing about how I really needed to get some perspective and advice on how to navigate this kind of next step in my spiritual life, where for a few years now, right? And this is kind of the whole theme of our podcast. For a few years, I've been out of university, I've been in the workforce, and things were kind of just lukewarm and very, I think, too steady almost, right? In a place where I was too content. And I think what they found was that I couldn't even rely on them almost for kind of the advice that I needed or the push in the right direction that I needed. So instead, they just pushed me into another direction of finding a spiritual director. And so I attended a retreat, over the weekend with our local parish young adults, and we had Father John O'Brien as our speaker. And so Father John is the vocation director in Toronto for the Jesuits, and his kind of bread and butter and specialty is Ignatian spirituality. So I got a nice refresher on that. But one of the questions that was posed to him was, how does one actually go about getting a spiritual director? And I kind of wish I'd heard from him before on the topic, but it would have been a little bit relevant for me earlier this year when I was kind of trying to figure out who would be a good spiritual director. But I think in my experience, I've had two spiritual directors now. Ultimately, it's kind of just if there is a priest or it doesn't even have to be a priest. If there's a priest or a religious sister or even a layperson if they're qualified, just trying to reach out to them. And that's kind of what I did. And, your first couple meetings, you don't really know if it's going to work or not. But for me, it's been working wonders so far. It's been 4-5 months now that I've been with him. So I've been really fortunate this year to find him.
Yeah, so I've had a similar story. So I've been just over a year now with a spiritual director. It was really interesting for me because when we started out, I kind of had this concept of spiritual directors like on a pedestal. I feel like an additional, piece of context that really helps with thinking about, how does one approach getting a spiritual director? What's this kind of all
Yeah.
about? Is recognizing, as my spiritual director put it, that there are different forms of spiritual direction, and that it's not to say that I think the way he put it was like it's not like you go to seminary for being a spiritual director and you come and you're like I'm a spiritual director now.
Right.
It's not like that, right? The idea really is to have someone who's helping you get to the right path, right? So the way that he gave an analogy on this was like carving a statue, right? Like old school Renaissance Michelangelo kind of time,
Mm-hmm.
where the first step really is going to a quarry and like hewing the rock out of the wall, right? And getting that, and then you kind of form it into a general shape, and then you start to chip away, and then you get more and more refined, and you're going to need different types of skills for each of those parts. So you're going to need different people for each of those parts, right? And so the way he was talking about is like, well, like all of those could be seen as spiritual directors, right? Where the first person hewing from the rock could be seen as maybe your parents bringing you to get to be baptized, right? Or that aunt who's like nagging you to go to church or that kind of a thing, right? These could all be seen as that thing, and every step along the way, even your friends, right, nudging you to say like, hey, you should go get a spiritual director, like that could be seen as a form of spiritual direction in a sense, right? And so, when you say it doesn't have to be a priest, doesn't even have to be a spiritual person, it could be a lay person. That's exactly it, right? we're really just looking for someone else to help us recognize God working in our lives. And like, depending on where you're at, people, you might need someone with particular expertise, or you might just need someone who's a little bit further along in the journey than you, right? And I think different people are going to need different things. But for me, the last year has been really crazy with my spiritual director. It's been a roller coaster. And it's helped me realize a lot of things about myself, particularly like even more than I thought. Like I really love nerding out about theology. So like half of our conversations is just like me asking him questions about like different theologies and
Yeah.
stuff,
Yeah.
which I find really fun. But um, also, there's been a lot to it in terms of learning what that relationship even meant to be like, right? I mentioned that, I kind of had them on a pedestal
Yeah.
before, and it was, I told myself for a long time I want a spiritual director, and it was more so because I was like, oh, because like, that's the thing to do to like become a saint or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, okay, like, is that statement wrong? Like, not necessarily, right? Am I doing this now for a different reason? Not really, but
Mm-hmm.
it's still somewhat different in that it's not like having a spiritual director is a superpower kind of a deal. But it's just
Yeah.
like, I have a particular friendship, which allows me to really, pursue the straight and narrow, right? And helps me to do that, which, praise God that I'm able to, right? Um,
Yeah, I think the pedestal thing and the friendship thing is important to put into perspective because, yeah, people who, even myself, 4 years ago before I had my first spiritual director, right? 3 years ago, whatever, I don't know. I definitely looked at them as like, oh, it's kind of a daunting thing, or it's kind of intimidating, and essentially also putting them on a pedestal. But you look at your relationship with your own spiritual director and also mine. And a lot of my friends and their spiritual directors, it's truly it's a friendship, and that's kind of just what it comes down to, right? Like, this is someone that you're definitely going to be leaning on for spiritual advice and guidance a lot, but at the same time, the beautiful thing about this is that it's truly a relationship, because my spiritual director always reminds me that, like, I might not know it in the moment, even he might not know it in the moment, but like, he's actually learning a lot from even just his conversations with me, which is still really humbling to think about. And I guess I'm just saying it to put it into existence. I don't, still not 100% sure I believe it. I guess I do, but like, still kind of on a like, it's weird, mind blowing kind of level, right?
yeah, it's so the way that my spiritual director puts it is that like even like our conversations are life giving for him as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which I think is a lot easier to kind of grasp for me. But I mean, just to wrap up on this topic maybe a little bit, the part the reason why we're talking so much about the friendship piece, right, is because really that's how you find your spiritual director at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
For me, I don't know about you, Jason, but for me, the way that I found my spiritual director in the end of it, I actually had engaged Father John O'Brien at first, and things didn't really work out there.
Mm-hmm.
It's this priest. I got a confession with him, and it was my first confession ever where I was like laughing during the confession because it
Right.
was like that much fun to talk to him. Right? I was like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, like I really clicked with this priest, and we had fun talking to each other. So maybe this would be a good person for me to talk about like my life with. Right?
Mm-hmm.
That's basically how that snowball started, and then that's how we started talking to each other as director directee. So it can be things as simple as that. Like if there's just someone you can talk to about the faith who you find like really enjoyable to talk to,
Mm-hmm.
you can ask the question, right? It doesn't have to be formal or whatever, but
I know we want to move on, but like, I kind of liken it to, when we were kids in like elementary school, and then you would see like your teachers at like the mall or something, and it'd be like,
mm-hmm.
what do you mean Mr. Chow can like go to the mall? Like, how can I see this guy outside of the classroom? There's no way. It's kind of like, it's kind of, and then now that we're actually like in our mid 20s and like closing in our 30s, and we have friends that are teachers in schools and everything, it's kind of like you see the flip side of that. And I think that's kind of maybe applicable to this situation too, right? Like, yeah, spiritual directors are like, they're people you lean on for guidance, but also they are regular human beings too. So I think one thing that, to move on here, one thing that I had touched on already with my note about GT20 was my discernment throughout kind of the summer and even throughout the year. And this was a really big thing in terms of my own quote unquote spiritual life formation. And I think the whole theme of just better habits. Better habits, because that helps to build towards virtue, right? Like, Like I said before, right? Sometimes emotions are going to be so high and so low that like you kind of just ride those waves. But like 90%, 95% of life, my life at least, isn't like that. And when I don't have those big significant moments that are, ups and downs in my life, I find myself settling really really easily into just regular rhythms and not really thinking too much. I'm not the type of person to think too much. Just being really content with how things are going. And that seeped into my prayer life as well. And this is something that I definitely worked with my spiritual director on, was trying to build. It doesn't even have to be better prayer habits, although obviously that was a big part of it. And maybe I'll share about it if I remember. But even in the summer, I remember. I think it was like after work, 5 p.m., 5:30 p.m. I would just log off and immediately go outside, go for a walk, and pray my rosary on the walk. Right. Even if I wasn't praying my rosary, I would still go out for the walk. And then, yeah, again, sometimes I would just come back from the walk, and like 3 or 4 times a week, I would do my lame Nintendo Switch Ring Fit Adventure workout, right, to keep up a workout routine and an exercise routine. And I think all of these things for me, what I was looking for was to build up that will to keep doing the thing, even if I don't feel like it. And that's been, I actually see a bit of the fruits from that, even now, because looking at the last 2 weeks, there were a couple times where I've managed to build up the habit of praying the rosary every day, right? So even in the last 2 weeks, I've managed to. Sorry, I remember having a few moments where I didn't actually feel like praying the rosary.
Mhm.
And I'm not going to go and say that like I've had it every single day since June, I think, when I first started this or whatever, that I've successfully kept up that habit. But there were some days where like, yeah, there was actually, I was just super super tired, and things got in the way, and I felt better about missing it on those particular days. But the last couple of weeks, these 2 days that I'm talking about, it felt more like it just felt like it was out of laziness.
Mhm.
And so I was like, okay, like, get off your bed, get off your phone, stop scrolling on social media, like, just have the will to spend 25 minutes and pray the rosary. And it worked, right? And I think I attribute that to what happened over the summer.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the habits piece is huge, but one thing I want to really focus on is like the pursuit of virtue, right? We talk about going back to the last one. We could talk about our relationship with our spiritual director. That's basically what we've been doing, right? It's really just building habits to grow in virtue. That's really a really good summary of what
Yeah.
the Christian life is in a lot of ways. And for me, it's been very similar, right, in terms of growing better habits, and doing so in a way that is um, cognizant of what I'm doing it for, but not over cognizant of that. And I say that
Sure.
in a weird enigmatic way on purpose because it's something I'm still kind of wrestling with. But in particular, for me, I mentioned this a couple times. Like my main prayer habit is like to pray when I wake up. Whether it's a morning offering or just now, I'm kind of non-fussed, it's whichever one.
Hmm.
And then in the evening, to pray compline or night prayer before I go to sleep.
Hmm.
So that's like kind of my baseline. And then recently, it's been really, really making sure that I pray the office there as well. But building out that prayer routine has been something that's been a huge part of my year. And it's taken most, if not all, of the year to build that habit, right? And it's
Hmm.
still something that's a process for me, honestly
Hmm.
speaking. Building out the different parts of that, recognizing, which things am I doing for the sake of doing them, which things are really bearing fruit, and how am I being reflective of all of this, right?
Hmm.
Um, and that's kind of my whole thing with the summer, for me, kind of in mirroring your summer of discernment has been like treating COVID time, particularly when I went back to Vancouver for 4 months, as a time of retreat, right?
Hmm.
It was really interesting because um, being in COVID, obviously we're not able to see as many people as we normally would. It really gave me a particular opportunity to be in quiet in a different way. And I was really blessed because when I was back in Vancouver, the parish that I went to also had an adoration chapel that was open every day. So that
Oh,
gave me
nice.
like, a lot of time to, I can't see anyone, so I'm just going to go to the chapel and see Jesus.
Hmm.
And it was really, really great to do that almost every day, to go to adoration or daily mass. So that was a really, really great time of retreat for me, to focus in on God and really just reorient a lot of things in my life, and to make things easier, like cutting out a lot of distractions, cutting out a lot of those things in my life that just aren't beneficial. They're just entertainment for entertainment's sake. And yeah, really, again, just realign myself. Right?
It took us like the better part of 25 minutes to bring up COVID, which I'm grateful for. That would be low hanging fruit in a year end review. But I think you're so right about, I feel like if we jumped onto like a bunch of sorry, not jumped onto, like we're hosts and or guests, that would be good enough to be invited. But if we listen to a bunch of podcasts, it doesn't matter, sports, politics, whatever, a lot of people might just bring up COVID as what a pain what a pain it's been, right, for 2020. And I think that's one way of looking at it. No one's thinking of COVID as a real blessing in their life. I mean, I think it's more so a blessing in disguise if we were going to look at it through that lens.
Yeah.
But I think it's very much up to us, right, to try to take something that has been given to us that isn't really that that great or that opportune, but instead to take that, instead of complaining about it, turn it into something that is going to be fruitful, right? And especially within the context of our faith lives, where for you, yeah, because you haven't been able to go out and see friends, you were able to go and find an adoration chapel and spend that time with Jesus instead. And what a beautiful blessing that is too, right? And I've definitely heard from like myself, what I've just talked about in terms of my own habits, and because I don't know if I would have focused as much on building those habits and working towards being a better virtuous Catholic if I didn't have that time on my hands. I probably could have been playing frisbee, playing board games, all of these things. But I think a lot of our own friends, we were able to kind of treat COVID as a time of retreat. That's exactly how you put it, and turn it into a way to help better our faith and better our current lives instead.
Yeah, that's like the Christian thing, right? That really, one of those core countercultural pieces is that we look for grace in suffering, right?
Yes.
And that's just one of the beautiful things that allows us to take things that are as sucky as COVID, right? To use high level terminology,
You sound really
highly
intelligent.
educated, anyways. It's awful, right? There's a lot of pain, a lot of suffering, but that's the Christian thing. Is like, where is the grace here? Because we know if we trust the Christian thing, right? If we trust our faith, then there are graces to be seen here.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Now, you had thrown one last thing onto our notes of 2020 here, in terms of participating in our own salvation.
Yeah,
what
so
does
this
that
is a
mean?
piece that's been coming up for me in the last maybe month or so, that is kind of leaving me off with a big question mark, and something for me to grapple with. Is this idea that we participate in our own salvation. So really, what this is getting at here is understanding that Jesus came 2,000 years ago, and he saved us from our sins. He saved us and all of humanity, and reconciled ourselves to him and to his Father. Right. This is something that we're all taught in like elementary school catechesis. It's one of the core tenets of our faith. Right.
Mm-hmm.
But the enigma there is that we still have a part to play, right? It's not to say that Jesus saved us all, and this is one of the core things in the Catholic faith. It's not that Jesus saved us all and redemption is there for us no matter what you do, right? There are things that you can do that are going to get you into hell, right? There are things that you can do that are going to get in the way of that redemption, right? And that's sin, right? Missing the mark, as I think the Greek is meant to really say.
Yeah.
And so, what we do matters, but it's also not so much to say that we get to heaven because of our own efforts. Mm-hmm. It's not that we earn our way into heaven either, right? So this is one of the beautiful things in our faith, but also one that I'm really, really struggling with right now, really wrestling with, I should really say, is that we, Christ instigated and gave us the platform for our salvation, for us to participate in, right? So we have a role to in our salvation, but it's really Him who does all the work, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of tying in a lot of the stuff we talked about previously, right? The primacy of
Primacy
grace,
of
right?
grace.
Right. So where the fact that we even want to do these things and have the will to do these things is coming from God. So it's really Him that's helping us with this, anyways, right? But still, we have our free will, which is one of the beautiful things, the kind of testaments of His love for us, that lets us follow through or not follow through, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of what I mean by this participating in our own salvation piece, which, yeah, it's really tough for me in particular, right? Because I was brought up in a way that was very like, you control, different
Yeah.
things, right?
Yeah.
My dad, one of his favorite things to say is, there's no such thing as luck, because luck is when preparation meets opportunity, right? So it's like,
Mm-hmm.
make sure you're prepared. And it's like, okay, I'm going to do the things to get myself ready for this thing or whatever, right? So that's kind of how I was brought up. And here's this tweak where it's like, okay, like I can do the things to get myself ready, but it's not thanks to me that these things came through. So it's just kind of weird.
No, I totally get you, and I totally understand why you're still wrestling through it, and even posing it to me, it's just it really begs the question of like almost some kind of philosophical existential crisis. It's sort of like, is there a point for us even being here, right? Like, so we do control things, but also it's not really within our control, and is there some kind of predestination going on? And I'm not trying to like just create questions for us to ponder, or maybe it'll be future podcast content. I don't know, but yeah, no, I think it's something that is kind of like a weird cycle when you try to think about it. And again, I guess that's just kind of philosophy in general. But no, I think what I would say is I'm excited that you shared about that, because I was only half joking about, potential podcast content, in 2021. Not in the sense of like, oh, let's just create content for the sake of content, but it's almost like this podcast for you and me in some ways is a bit of a diary, is a bit of a journal, is a bit
Yep.
of a spiritual journal. And I would love to see, maybe 12 months from now, maybe 6 months from now, whatever it is, if we were to like revisit everything, if we were to, let's say COVID is over and I can come back over again and we just started binging all of our episodes, can we be like, hey, I remember in December 2020 when we were really wrestling with this, and looking back, I can see the fruits of that wrestling, and I can see how I've managed to find those answers and increase my faith in the Lord. I think that's what really excites me, and kind of the whole theme of our podcast.
Yeah, totally. No, I'd love to kind of just dive into this, right? Because it's it's a fun conversation. Like it gets really philosophical, you're right. And there are different things that come up in it. But really, to me, this is marrying our today's culture in a lot of ways
Mm-hmm.
with the culture of our faith, right? Because our culture is also very much about like the self-made man, right? Like what am I doing to become the next person who's in the top 30 under 30 because I did all this stuff to like make myself successful, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of what society celebrates, right? It's like what we do for ourselves. And then here is again, the countercultural. It's like, okay, well, it's great that you did all those things, but it's not really about you.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd love to dive into that. I think it's a great thing for us to look at.
It'll be exciting. It'll be exciting, and this is again our last episode for 2020. Is there anything else you want to cover in terms of reviewing 2020, or?
I don't think so. Not really.
Yeah.
These are the main things, I think.
Yeah, so again, our last episode for the year, and we've been doing this for 4 months now, and 5 months actually, and we really have to thank you guys for following along. I think just even listening to our quote unquote what we just referred to as our spiritual journey, right? Like, who actually wants to sit down and listen to us talk? I don't know what the appeal in that is, but we do hope and pray that maybe listening to that has offered some kind of relevancy to your own spiritual life and your own spiritual journey, right? And I think in terms of looking into the next year, not that Andrew and I have formally talked about it, but yeah, I think we're excited for what the next 12 months of podcasts look like. Whether it's, again, sitting down and being able to examine our spiritual journey so far and the things that we've learned, but also, bringing people on. We've talked about this informally, and really picking their brains or learning from their own personal journeys as well. So we're excited for 2021. We hope you guys are too. With the Christmas season coming up, I do want to say actually a PSA first. So Cherry and Andrew were talking about this just before we started recording, but in case you guys haven't heard, and in case you are listening to this before December 24th, the Archdiocese of Toronto is providing communion like short 15-minute communion services. So the Archdiocese, the Cardinal Collins, through a missive, asked all of our local parishes within the Archdiocese to open themselves up for short 15-minute communion services. So you can go and sign up for those if you really wish to receive communion during Christmas. Obviously, it's a really important day. And, with COVID, if maybe you haven't even gone out to Mass over the last 6 months, I think this would be an especially opportune time for you to go and take advantage of that. So look up your local parish website and see if those Eventbrite signups are up and available. Okay, so yeah, just to sign off here, Merry Christmas to all of you. Stop saying happy holidays. Quick note, I had originally proposed that we do a full episode on not saying happy holidays. Just remember that Jesus is the reason for the season, right? I feel kind of lame saying that rhyme or whatever, but there wouldn't be a holiday break if Jesus wasn't born, and if Mary didn't say yes, and if the angel Gabriel didn't come. So I don't know if you have anything to say.
There is nothing insensitive about wishing someone else joy on a day that you celebrate. Okay? That's my thing. I've gotten so many happy holiday emails from everyone signing off before it out, and I answer every one of them. I hope you have a great Christmas too. Because I want them to be happy on December 25th, and there's nothing insensitive about that. So don't be shy.
Exactly. So we didn't do a full episode on it. You're welcome, but just stop wishing people happy holidays. That's all. Okay, so yeah, on behalf of Andrew, thank you guys again for listening to us these past 5 months, and we hope you're as excited as we are for this upcoming year. And Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas, everyone.